Today's video sponsor is GVG Mall, bringing you all the software deals you need, like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and even Windows Server 2022. For all of these, you can use my SKG discount code for 25% off, getting a Windows 10 serial key for only $16. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. Hello guys, this is Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco and welcome to my channel. And as for today's video, we have a new GPU comparison, this time with the RTX 4070 versus the RX 6800 versus the RX 6950 XT. And the point of making this video in between these cards, although we're talking about a mid-end new generation versus a high-end early generation on the AMD side, for example with the 6950 XT, is that these cards, at least the 6950 XT and the RTX 4070, are roughly at the same price. In Newegg US, for example, the RTX 4070, the cheapest one, costs $598, while the cheapest RX 6800 costs $484 and gives you a copy of The Last of Us, with the RX 6950 XT Red Devil, very nice card, costing $629, also offering you a copy of The Last of Us. As for prices in Europe, Mind Factory Dutchland, we have RTX 4070 for a minimum in the promotion of €609. As for the RX 6800, it costs €499 plus a copy of The Last of Us, and the RX 6950 XT costs in promotion as well $649, 16GB versus the 12GB on the 4070, with the 6800 also having 16GB. So the RX 6800 is cheaper and the RTX 4070 and RX 6950 XT are roughly at the same price. So which one should you get? Should you go for raw power, more VRAM, maybe features like the DLSS 3 on the RTX 4070? Which card should you get in terms of performance, price, or price performance? Well, let's find out.
He's going to catch us! Keep running!
Today's first game is Plague Tale Requiem. At 1080p, the RTX 4070 is performing as it should, being 25% faster than the RX 6800 and only 4% slower than the RX 6950 XT, which is great considering its power draw. At 1440p, the RTX 4070's advantage over the RX 6800 goes down to 17%, while now being 13% slower than the RX 6950 XT, possibly due to its slower buzz width. And at 4K, the RX 6800 is fairly close to the RTX 4070, but none of them reach even the 45 average FPS mark, with the RX 7950 XT being the only card delivering over 50 FPS. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the newer NVIDIA GPUs perform much better than the older ones, with the RTX 4070 now being only 12% faster than the RX 6800 and 8% slower than the RX 6950 XT. As the resolution goes up to 1440p, I thought that the RTX 4070's advantage would become lower, but it maintains its advantage over the RX 6800, now being 10% slower than the RX 6950 XT, which is a very good result for this card. And it is only at 4K that we finally see the RX 6950 XT pulling considerably ahead, now being 18% faster than the RTX 4080, with even the RX 6800 performing very close to it at around the same power consumption. Cyberpunk 2077 is one of Nvidia's poster games where they implement all their new features, and that's why Nvidia cards run this game very well, even more in terms of ray tracing. But in terms of rasterization, things are actually a bit different. At 1080p, the RTX 4080 is only 8% faster than the RX 6800, while being 13% slower than the RX 6950 XT. And as we go to 1440p, the RTX 4070's advantage gets even lower, now being barely faster than the RX 6800 and around 20% slower than the RX 6950 XT. And at 4K, it gets even funnier, with the RX 6800 now matching the RTX 4070 and with the RX 7950 XT being the only card able to achieve close to 60 average FPS. Interesting. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is a game known to favor AMD GPUs quite a lot, but even here the RX 6800 wasn't able to pull ahead of the RTX 4070 that is 11% faster, being only beaten by the RX 6950 XT. Interesting to note though that although the RTX 4070 has higher average FPS, it has the same 1% lows as the RX 6800, meaning that the AMD card delivers a smoother gameplay overall. And going to 1440p shows that even more, where the RX 6800 now basically matches the RTX 4070's performance, with the RX 6950 XT now being over 26% faster than both the other cards. And at 4K, well, the same advantage gets bigger, with the RX 6950 XT pushing 22 average FPS over the other two cards, which in terms of gameplay smoothness makes a lot of difference if you're running a high refresh rate monitor. Forza Horizon 5 is an interesting title as well, because at 1080p both AMD cards were being beaten by the RTX 4070, but as soon as we enable Smart Access Memory, the performance boost is just insane, with the RX 6800 getting closer to the RTX 4070 and the RX 7950 XT beating it by 18 average FPS. At 1440p the hierarchy gets maintained, with the RX 6950 XT still being barely faster than the RTX 4070. And well, it is only at 4K that we can finally see a 17% performance advantage for the RX 6950 XT over the RTX 4070, which in here should be much higher taking in consideration its power draw. Overall, good results for all cards. I'm not gonna lie to you, we had some really interesting results before, but I must say that Hogwarts Legacy ones are very interesting. At 1080p, the RX 6800 is faster than the RTX 4070, and yes, you're seeing it right. It is faster on average and with considerably higher 1% lows, with the RX 6950 XT being 27% faster than both cards. And you might say that this is happening because Nvidia GPUs have a bigger CPU overhead and we're running at 1080p, so blah blah blah, but that's not the case. At 1440p we have exactly the same scenario, with the RX 6800 still being faster than the RTX 4070 with much higher 1% lows. And even going to 4K changes absolutely nothing, with both lower-end GPUs achieving around 45 average FPS and the RX 6950 XT being the only GPU getting close to the 60 average FPS mark.
Approach Cessna Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra is type Cessna 152 4 miles south.
In Microsoft Flight Simulator, the only card not being CPU bottlenecked at 1080p is the RX 6800, while the other two cards are. And the reason why the RX 6950 XT is delivering more FPS is because Nvidia drivers have higher CPU overhead, leading to lower FPS in CPU-bound scenarios. Although as we move to 1440p and the CPU bottleneck goes mostly away, the results are the usual, with the RTX 4070 being the middle ground in between both cards and the RX 6950 XT being 14% faster than the RTX 4070 and 37% faster than the RX 6800. And at 4K, we have the RX 6950 XT almost reaching 70 average FPS, the RTX 4070 almost reaching 60, and the RX 6800 almost reaching 50. Now on Rainbow Six Extraction using Vulkan API, we have the RX 6800 once again surpassing the RTX 4070 by a little in the averages but by a lot in the 1% lows, with the RX 6950 XT overtaking the RTX 4070 by 73 average FPS, which translates into a 29% advantage. At 1440p though, unlike in the previous titles, the RX 6800 actually loses advantage and now performs slightly worse than the RTX 4070, and at 4K it gets even worse for the RX 6800 that is now 17% slower than the RTX 4070, with the same now matching the RX 6950 XT's average FPS, but getting considerably lower 1% lows. The second Vulkan title is Red Dead Redemption 2, and one of the first things that we can notice is the way higher minimums on the AMD cards, with the RX 6950 XT strangely getting lower minimums than the RX 6800. Here the RX 6950 XT is 20% faster than the RTX 4070 on averages, but up to 70% faster in the minimums, which is a lot. And moving to 1440p, the minimums get even stranger, with the RX 6800 somehow performing much better in that department than the RX 6950 XT. And at 4K, all GPUs can go above 60 average FPS, with the RX 6950 XT delivering around 80. Now we have Guardians of the Galaxy that recently had an update on the AMD side that made the game run quite better. At 1080p all GPUs are basically CPU bottlenecked, and that's the reason why they all have more or less the same performance. Moving to 1440p things start to change, with the RTX 4070 now being 7% faster than the RX 6800 and 8% slower than the RX 6950 XT, because even at 1440p we are slightly CPU bottlenecked. And at 4K, when we finally get rid of any kind of CPU bottlenecks, we can see that the RX 6800 is very close to the RTX 4070 and the RX 6950 XT is 21% faster than the RTX 4070. Now we have The Last of Us once again, and it always baffles me to see that even though the game was made for RDNA GPUs that run on both PS5 and Xbox series, they're still slower in this game than the new Nvidia 4000 series, with the RTX 4070 being 27% faster than the RX 6800, even surpassing the RX 6950 XT, which is great for the RTX 4070 users, I guess. At 1440p things start shifting, with the RX 6950 XT now being the fastest GPU, but only by a small margin, with the RTX 4070 still being 20% faster than the RX 6800. And at 4K, well, things don't really change, with the RX 6950 XT having only a short advantage while consuming much more power. The last rasterization title is God of War, and here we have the opposite scenario of The Last of Us, with the RX 6800 being very close to the RTX 4070 in terms of performance, and the RX 6950 XT being up to 29% faster. At 1440p, the RTX 4070 is only 11% faster than the RX 6800, while the RX 6950 XT is up to 24% faster than the RTX 4070. It is also odd to see that Smart Access Memory actually decreases the performance a lot on this 6950 XT somehow, and that still applies to 1440p ultra-wide, where we have a performance decrease of 8%. Well, it is what it is, I guess. And now with the 12 games average, we have the RX 6950 XT, while costing currently the same, performing better than the RTX 4070 by 14.2% at 1080p, 18.7% at 1440p, and 17.8% at 4K. I shall also note that the RX 6800 delivered very interesting results, as it performs within 10% of the RTX 4070's performance, while consuming around the same power and being much cheaper in the second-hand market. But since rasterization performance isn't everything, obviously, let's move to the ray tracing benchmarks.
Lost hope. We're not from here either. Stellantis locked us up here a year ago.
And the first ray tracing game, as usual, is the full ray tracing game Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition. Here we can see that even the RX 6950 XT is completely obliterated by the RTX 4070, with it being 26% faster at 1080p, 28% faster at 1440p, and 33% faster at 4K. It is important to note though that the RX 6950 XT has much better 1% lows at 1080p and 1440p, which leads to a much smoother gameplay, and I could definitely notice the difference while testing all the cards. Moving to Cyberpunk 2077, well, the results were more than expected. We're talking about AMD's first ray tracing generation versus Nvidia's third generation. At 1080p, we have the RTX 4070 delivering 35% more FPS than the RX 6950 XT, that gets increased to a 44% difference as soon as we use FSR and DLSS. At 1440p, things get bad, with even the RTX 4070 struggling to achieve 42 average FPS and the RX 6800 not even reaching 25. In here, when using the DLSS and FSR, the RTX 4070 is 33% faster than the RX 6950 XT and 68% faster than the RX 6800. Massive win for the RTX 4070 here. Moving to a less Nvidia-sided title, we have Resident Evil 4, where things actually get interesting. Running this game natively, the RX 6950 XT is just a bit faster than the RTX 4070, but it actually delivers the same performance when using ray tracing. Moving to 1440p, the RTX 4070 is now slower than the RX 6950 XT, even in ray tracing, where it gets beaten by 7 average FPS. And even at 1440p ultra-wide, the RX 6950 XT is still the fastest card, surpassing the RTX 4070 in all case scenarios, being 23% faster in rasterization and 11% faster in ray tracing. Spider-Man Remastered is our final ray tracing benchmark, and this one is really heavy on the CPU as well, and that's the reason why we start at 1440p here instead of 1080p. Here we can see that the RX 6950 XT is still slightly CPU bottlenecked, but even then, it is still faster than the RTX 4070, being only slightly slower when using the ray tracing, with even the RX 6800 delivering a respectable 78 average FPS when using it. At 4K, we finally get rid of the CPU bottleneck entirely, and now the RTX 4070 is actually faster than the RX 6950 XT by 22% when using ray tracing, which was once again expected. And the final benchmarks are with upscalers, starting with God of War. At 1440p, all cards perform decently well in this game, with the DLSS putting the RTX 4070 only 14% slower than the RX 6950 XT, but delivering slightly better image on the DLSS versus FSR. At 1440p ultra-wide, even the RX 6800 is able to achieve almost 100 average FPS when using FSR, with the RTX 4070 achieving 114 with DLSS. Still slower than the RX 6950 XT of course, but with very good overall numbers. And to finalize, we have Spider-Man Remastered at 4K with several upscaling techniques. As you can see when running natively, the RX 6950 XT is faster than the RTX 4070, but as soon as we enable FSR and DLSS, the RTX 4070 basically matches it, maybe because we reach a CPU bottleneck at lower render resolutions. Interesting to note as well that XeSS works much worse on AMD cards than FSR, where the RX 6950 XT, for example, delivers only 7 FPS more when using XeSS versus running natively, which makes absolutely no sense. But well, all said and done, let's move to the conclusion. And well, as you saw, in terms of performance, the RTX 4070 is indeed the middle ground in between these two cards, the RX 6800 and the 6950 XT, although we have some advantages and disadvantages for all cards. For example, the RX 6800 is way cheaper. If you go, for example, to the used market, it is way cheaper. You can get, for example, an RX 6800 for, let's say, $300. And for $300, this card is a still massive and great deal for $350, okay? You can't get a used 4070 for $300 or $350, and even a used 6950 XT will be most likely around, let's say, $450, which is still a massive deal if you can get one, but if you want to get both new, they are at the same price. As for the RX 6950 XT, as I told you, used maybe $450, but if we're comparing prices new, it is still around $640, but at the same time it has disadvantages compared to the 4070. For example, the power draw, it's the first one that comes to my mind, because we're having like 350 watts versus the 200 watts on the 4070, so we're talking about at higher resolutions, we're talking about almost double the power draw of the 4070, and that's a lot. So from 100 to 150 watts more than the 4070, and once again that is a lot for, let's say, 15 to 18% more performance. That's a lot, and even less performance in terms of ray tracing, so yeah. And as for the RTX 4070's advantages, well, we have some actually. We have firstly the power draw, once again way lower power draw than the 6950 XT, more or less compared with the 6800, a little bit less at higher resolution since the 6800 even undervolted, will be around 220 watts at higher resolutions, around 200 watts, 180 at lower resolutions. So we have the power draw, which is very good, 200 watts max. We have also the DLSS 3 with the frame generation now, because, well, at least for now, as the time of making this video, FSR 3 is still not released, okay? And although frame generation is it's not perfect, not even near that, but at least we have that option if you want to. So you can use frame generation if you want that frame boost, and if you don't really care much about movement artifacts or excessive motion blur. If you are not picky on that, well, frame generation in some games might actually be very good. In some others, not really. It is kind of a messed up experience, but in others, frame generation is actually pretty nice. If we're talking about other features, you have more features as well in terms of workflow. For example, NVIDIA cards have the CUDA cores, work much better in terms of some workflows like Blender and so on. So it depends on what you want. If you want a more efficient card that does its job for most needs of most people, the RTX 4070 is the way to go. If you want a card maybe for better longevity with more VRAM and more raw power in terms of rasterization, the RX 6950 XT is the way to go. And if you want the most, or at least the best price performance ratio that you can get on the used market, well, the RX 6800 is the way to go. So great price performance ratio on the used market and great power draw as soon as you undervolt the card. So as you see, around the same power draw as the 4070, while being much cheaper in the used market. Basically that's it. What I basically have to say about the whole NVIDIA 4000 series is that they are great cards at terrible prices. And NVIDIA will keep doing this, the price hiking. if people keep buying. And I don't see people stop buying because some people don't really care about the money. Some people prefer to give more money for the Nvidia cards. But anyway, people keep buying, so they keep price hiking. That's how it works. Yeah. And well guys, thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video as it really helps a lot. And see you in the next one.